In the next video here, we're going to expand on our types of materials that we've learned so far, and we're going to go over the V-Ray two-sided material. It's called the V-Ray material two-sided. The purpose of this material is to give you a way to have a separate shader on the backside of a normal, meaning the normals facing away from you that are reversed, and it's extremely useful for things like paper and plants. So we've got a fern loaded up here, just a speed tree thing I created. And what we are going to be doing, one of the really huge benefits of this two-sided shader is it has a translucency slider, and it will actually propagate the lighting information from one side of the shader to the backside. So in this example right here, I don't have any of it turned on yet. This is just a regular V-Ray material. And what I want to show is if we look through these passes here, so if I look at my normals pass, you can see that we are in fact looking at some of the backsides of some of these leaves. It feels like the way this was generated in SpeedTree, I may even be looking at the backside that's actually on the top of some of them, which is fine, especially with leaves. And if I look at my GI pass, I can see that most of my lighting information in this render is coming from the GI at the moment, which is really not good, especially for this plant. So if I look at my lighting pass, you can see it goes quite dark. If I go to my raw light, we can see a little bit better. You can see that we can see the sun kind of tracing across the ground. And we can really start seeing little highlights on the tips of these leaves, but generally speaking, this plant is very dark. And not really what we are going to be looking for. So let's go ahead and set this up as a V-Ray two-sided material, and we can see one of the major benefits of this shader. So let's go ahead and open up our node editor. And so if I just select the leaflets shape, there we go, you can see the way this shader is set up. And this fern is just a SpeedTree preset, so all these textures come with SpeedTree. And if we look at this, let me get this shader named. So we'll just call this fern material. We've just got diffuse color, normal, a specular, and lastly an alpha for the cutout of the leaves. If I go ahead and create a V-Ray material two-sided, we'll delete that shading group to maintain the one I've already got. You can see if we look at these settings, let's shrink this guy kind of down out of the way down here. We've got a slot for front material, a slot for back material, and then we've got this translucency texture slider right here. One of the new features in V-Ray 3 is actually this multiply by front diffuse. And that's kind of nice because previously, if you had this slider above 50% gray, it would actually start taking more of the front side lighting than before. And it only accepted raw lighting, whereas now you can say multiply by front diffuse, which keeps the slider a little bit more in check. The other checkbox here, the force single-sided submaterials, will actually go in and it will make sure that if you have double-sided options turned on, that those will be defaulted to off. And that is recommended to keep that on by Chaos Group. And so what I'm talking about here, you can see on my fern material, if I go to my reflection advanced section, you can see there's this reflect on backside. And so you may want that if you have certain pieces, like in this case, I have, these pieces right here that are the like main kind of curled, these guys, the fiddle, it's called this fern fiddlehead. So if I was to graph that shader, let's bring in a new node editor here. I actually have reflect on backside turned on because I'm not going to create a two-sided material of that. I might end up doing it. We'll see how it looks. But generally speaking, the way that object is set up, it's kind of a solid surface. So we're just leaving that one as is. So if you had gone in and turned that on, the two-sided material will ignore it so that it doesn't stack your reflections. But just in case, we'll keep that off. So my fern material here, what I'm going to do is just first map in my front material. And just for the sake of setting this up right now, we'll get in a little bit deeper in this. I'm just going to map the exact same material to the backside. I'm going to turn my translucency down a little bit, and now we can immediately go in and start IPRing this to see what we've got. So I'm going to save this. And we'll get our IPR going. And it looks exactly the same because I didn't actually connect that material yet. So I do want to go into my shading group here and middle click drag that shader in there. And now you can see that got a lot brighter. And we can actually go in, if we look at our raw light pass now, you can see that we were getting all of that lighting information from the front side of the leaf trickling down through onto the back side, which is pretty awesome. So now we're able to actually get a really nice translucency on these leaves. And if I was to really look closely here, you can actually see the shadow of the leaves behind it on these leaves. And the effect that we're going for, I saved this image from the internet here, sunlight through fern, is really exactly this. If the sun is shining through those leaves, we should be getting some of that really bright color coming through because the leaves are so translucent. And we don't want to do this with subsurface scattering because it's not a solid surface. It's a single plane. And so there's no way to actually calculate the subsurface because there's not a place for the ray to enter and exit the object. So let's dial this in a little bit more. We can start experimenting now. So my lighting's feeling a little dark actually, so I'm gonna adjust that a little bit before we go too much further. So on my actual V-Ray sun, I'm going to go in here and let's increase this intensity multiplier a little bit. I really want to be able to start seeing that in that lighting pass here. So there we go. Now we can start seeing a lot more of that. Maybe we can even do 2. Cool. And now if I go back to my RGB, we can start seeing we're starting to feel that lighting a little bit better. My sun's a little low. I could also try raising my sunlight up a little bit. And that'll also brighten it quite a bit, since right now the sun is down on the horizon, and so it's getting a lot of the lighting taken away from that atmosphere. So you can see now we're starting to get a little harder of a shadow, and we're starting to really reveal some of that translucency in that shader. If I go to my lighting pass now, you can really start to see that. And so again, just to kind of, let me get that out of the way here. So let's just flip this back to that other shader, and you can really see the massive difference. So that's just our regular fern material, and you can see it just completely goes black. And now we'll put that two-sided material back in there, and we get all of that awesome backlighting. So now let's go in and we can start seeing in this kind of simple example that we've got here, the difference if I turn on multiply by front diffuse. And there we go. So you can see how that dulled that down because it is going in and just exactly what it says, multiplying by the diffuse color from the front material. And now you can see, this new feature is pretty nice. I do find myself turning it on in a lot of situations. If I go back to that lighting pass now, you can see that we are getting a much more detailed look through that lighting. Because the idea is that there is, color information on that other side, and we should be sending that through as well. You can also see now I can turn up my translucency texture a little bit. We can start getting some really nice bright areas. Even though I'm multiplying this by the front diffuse, you do need to be careful with this because you may actually still end up getting some weird artifacts if you start sending more of that lighting from the front side to the back, which actually kind of feels like it's starting to happen here with the way I have that slider. So maybe we'll just keep it around 50%. That looks a little bit better. Cool. So that's really it. that's the basics of this material. So let's dial this in a little bit nicer, because we may actually be able to get slightly different bit of variation to this. I'm going to stop this. And if you're ever doing leaves and plants and that kind of thing, one of the really nice aspects of this shader is that you can have two different materials on the front and back. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to say duplicate with connections, and I'm going to do that in my Hypershade. So I'm going to say edit duplicate with connections to network. There we go. So we'll just call this Fern backside. And my color on my leaf right here, maybe I want to just gamma that up a little bit and just change it, ever so slightly. So maybe we'll do like 1.2. And then we'll map that into the diffuse color. There we go. So the color on, you can see if you look right here on that swatch, it's just a little bit duller. It'll be a little bit more washed out on that backside, which I kind of like. And I can also adjust the reflection a little bit differently on this shader. So maybe this one, because it's the backside of the leaf, can be slightly different glossiness value, so maybe a little softer. And actually my reflection amount right now is set to 0, which was probably bad for the other one. So let's bring this to 0.5, and this reflection will bring pretty bright. I had that turned down just so I could dial the translucency and show that before I turn it on. So let's go ahead and save. And now let's connect our material two-sided correctly. There we go. So now I've got that fern back connected to the backside. And I do want to, one quick note here, because my normals on these leaves here do appear flipped, I would probably want to adjust that because I'm going to actually get the backside material on the top of the leaf right here. So that could be, something you do want to take care of. So if I go to my, turn off my two-sided lighting, go to my shading here and say use default material, I will be able to see where those flipped normals are. And let's go ahead and create a new perspective for myself since I was using my perspective camera. So you can see these are actually, the normals on this are not in the best of shape. So I would probably want to go in here and work on that. So I'm going to get these normals flipped, which is actually going to be a little bit of a task. You can see I can't just simply double click and select them. So let me get those taken care of, and I'm going to pause the video. Okay, generally speaking, all the normals are now good. That was definitely an issue on the speed tree end, that about half of the fronds had flipped normals. So let's go ahead and do a quick test render with our new shader setup. Let's bounce back over perspective camera and go. So let's go back over to RGB, and we'll do one quick IPR here. So that's coming in. It's definitely a subtle change, but it's looking pretty nice. Just so you can really see what we, exactly what I was talking about with what we changed. There's the leaflets. Cool. You could even see if I took this backside material here and we just made it like a red V-Ray material, I think that would be pretty clear. You can see exactly what's going on with this. Just made it like red. Yeah, so very interesting effect, and it's because it's going to be multiplying that through, you'll get some very interesting feel to all of this. And you can see now I don't have the same alpha, so I could at least propagate that over into my opacity map. There we go. But you can do some really interesting stuff with this. Some like deciduous trees have a very, very stark difference between their front and backside. Also, with something like a piece of paper, you could have two different textures for the front and back, so you can see the writing from one side of the piece of paper to the other. And that's going to be our next little example of this. So let's go ahead and get our fern reconnected here, just so that you have the shader set up in the file. So this is material two-sided fern. And now I'm going to open up our piece of paper file. Just give me one sec. Cool, so we've got our paper loaded up. I'm going to get a quick render of this scene. This is the same one we're using for the light demo. You can see we've got a piece of paper with some beautiful Leonardo da Vinci sketches on them, and a little bit of an alpha to hold out some of the edges, and the paper's got a little bit of a wobble modeled in just for lighting purposes. So I already created the shader in this scene file, and we can go over it a little bit quicker since we just created the other one, but let's take a look at what the shader looks like. And we can go ahead and graph this. So we've got our two sketches coming in. Those are getting remapped for the specular color, just to kind of give a little bit of a tinge of blue off of where the drawings are on the paper. And then we've got, if I refresh that guy, you can see we've got a JPEG of just some kind of bumpy creases and stuff on some old paper, and then a separate texture for the actual alpha. The only difference between the front and back side in this case is the texture pumping into it. I've kept the bump map the same, so that the creases feel like they're in the same spot on both sides, and then they both have the same alpha. So right now I have the V-Ray two-sided material not translucent at all, just so we can kind of quickly see what that looks like when we go in and start dialing that in. So we'll save this file. This is going to be materials two-sided paper version 1, and we'll go ahead and start that IPR. Cool. And now let's just start and notice I have already turned on the checkbox for multiply by front diffuse. Let's also rename this guy. So this is going to be paper two-sided. Cool. And now let's just start dialing that in. And what we should start seeing is some of that backside of that drawing showing through. And there you can see it. So there's some actually right now it's not very subtle, it's pretty intense. You can see the drawings on the backside of the paper as well. So maybe we want to dial that back down a little bit. And in this case, if you look at our lighting setup, what we've got going on is two V-Ray sphere lights, cool and a warm. This is kind of acting as our key light, the warm one. And then we've also got a nice fill up here across the top, just to catch a little bit of that top specular hit. It'll be really subtle. You can see actually it's pretty much black. There's a little bit of information in there, but mostly black. But what's pretty cool about this two-sided material and why I brought it into this scene, you can see right now with the way the lighting is, there's really not a lot of that other drawing coming through. But if I bring this other light back into frame a little bit, you can see how really nicely it just starts capturing, and that translucency, with that really bright, let me make this a little bit bigger, with that really bright light source directly behind it, you immediately start seeing that second drawing coming through, which is amazing. And also you'll see the shadow of this other board casting onto the paper as well. So let me move this back over a little bit. We'll try and get that shadow to land on the board, or the shadow of the board to land on the paper. And you should be able to see that now. So you can see if I raise up that board a little bit, and let's just move it over. You can see that shadow shifting, which is pretty cool. And so if I was to just make our selection right there, and you can really feel it just, it almost loses its shape, which I guess if a piece of paper was really that backlit, that is kind of what would happen. So let's go ahead and hide that board. You can see it got a little bit brighter. It's a little bit hard to see. I would need a sharper shadow. So we could let's bring that board back and we'll just put the board really right behind that piece of paper so that you can really see. And I can really see that darkened area right there. And you're literally seeing the edge of the board through that via the shadow, which is pretty awesome. And so these are none of this is refraction based at all. It's all just taking the lighting information from one side of your shader, the back side of the normal in this case, and propagating that through to the other side. You can see if I flip this around now, do we still get quite a bit of that backside coming through because our light is so bright. If I go in, I can maybe, if I dial this significantly lower, the translucency, now we're just getting a darker side. We're really only seeing the shadow because that light is overtaking the information from the front side now. So let's bring that back up. Let's bring this rotation back around, and you can see. So now we're seeing that front side, and if I bring that light around to the front, you can see that it almost completely hides what was visible from the backside. You can see the backside texture. Get that rotated around. There we go. So see, that's the backside of the texture. Let that kind of roll in. So it's got the drawings of the face and the muscles and stuff. And now the skeletons from the other side are not visible at all. So it's a really versatile shader. There's definitely a lot of uses for it. It's pretty cool. Actually, it looks like our gamma's wrong on that other one, so we can go in here. Forgot to do... Oh, no, never mind. Take it back. That's all good. Felt a little washed out, but I guess that's just the texture. But you can see that's the backside, the muscles, and then the skeletons on the front. So pretty cool. And so if I was to take this back to where it was, somewhere around in there, and maybe turn down the intensity a little bit, we'll get something that feels a little bit more normal. So now let's bring this all the way back. And we'll do one quick test render. So you can see we'll hopefully get a little bit of that translucency coming through. I didn't really push our light far enough away, but you can definitely get an idea. All of this stuff in through here is ever so slight, the shader from the backside coming through. So super cool. So that's another just kind of, an idea for how to use this V-Ray two-sided material. You can even use it on cloth as well. Curtains in a window, that type of thing. Anything where you're modeling a single-sided object or, with a single piece of geometry, polygon plane kind of built, and you want some of this faked translucency without having to model thickness and give it subsurface scattering. So we're going to switch gears here and continue talking about some of the other V-Ray shaders.